Chapter 7. Edward Tulliver dies. 3 weeks passed. Tom did not speak to Maggie. One afternoon, he came back to the house at 2 o'clock. He spoke to his father. "I have good news, Father," Tom said. "Uncle Dean lent me some money. I have traded with the money. I have bought goods and sold them well. I have £320. We can pay Lawyer Wakeham." "Bessie," said Mr. Tulliver, "we have a good son." The next afternoon, Mr. Tulliver went to St. Ogg's with Tom. They rode their horses to Lawyer Wakeham's office. The lawyer was not there, but they left £300 for him. Then Tom went to the office of Guest and Company. Mr. Tulliver rode back to the mill. A man on a horse was waiting outside the mill. It was Lawyer Wakeham. "I want to speak to you, Tulliver," said Wakeham. "I will speak first," Mr. Tulliver shouted. "I have left £300 at your office. I have paid you all your money. I will not work for you now." "Good. I don't want you," Wakeham replied. "You are a very stupid man, Tulliver." "And you are a very bad man," Tulliver shouted. "I am going," Wakeham said. "Move your horse." Mr. Tulliver lifted his riding whip. He rode towards the lawyer. Wakeham's horse was frightened. It turned suddenly, and Wakeham fell to the ground. Mr. Tulliver got off his horse. He started to beat the lawyer with his riding whip. "Help! Help!" Wakeham shouted. Maggie and Mrs. Tulliver ran out of the house. Maggie screamed. "Stop, Father! Stop!" she shouted. She held her father's arms. "Please stop, Father," she said. "Mother, help Mr. Wakeham." Wakeham stood up. He got onto his horse. "I will not forget this, Tulliver," he said, and he rode slowly away. "Father, come into the house," said Maggie. Mr. Tulliver did not move. "I am ill," he said. "Help me. There is a pain in my head." Maggie and her mother took Mr. Tulliver into the house. "Go and get Tom," Mr. Tulliver said. Maggie ran to St. Ogg's. She went to Guest and Company's office. "Come quickly, Tom," she said. Mr. Tulliver lay in bed. He could not move. He was very ill. Tom, Maggie, and Mrs. Tulliver sat by the bed. "What shall I do, Father?" asked Tom. "Save your money. Buy the mill from Wakeham," Mr. Tulliver said. "Yes, Father," said Tom. "Take care of your mother, and take care of your sister," Mr. Tulliver said. "Yes, Father, I will," said Tom. "Kiss me, Maggie," said Mr. Tulliver. "Kiss me, Bessie. Goodbye, my son." And he died. Tom and Maggie looked at each other. "We must always love each other, Tom," Maggie said. Tom held his sister's hand. "Yes, Maggie," he said. Chapter 8. Stephen Guest. The Tulliver family left Dorlcote Mill. Tom lived alone in St. Ogg's. He worked hard. Mrs. Tulliver went to St. Ogg's too. Mrs. Dean had died. Mrs. Tulliver lived with Lucy and Mr. Dean. Maggie went away. She became a teacher in a school. 2 years passed. It was an afternoon in April 1840. Maggie was back in St. Ogg's for a holiday. She was talking to Lucy Dean. "I hate teaching," said Maggie. "You must stay here, Maggie," Lucy said. "Aunt Tulliver will look after us all. Don't go back to the school." "Thank you," Maggie said. I will be happy here. Maggie looked out of the open window. The dean's house was next to the river Floss. The river is very beautiful, Maggie said. And you are beautiful too. Are you happy, Lucy? Do you have many friends? Are you in love? Lucy looked down at her hands. Yes, she said. I am in love with Stephen Guest. Maggie smiled. Tell me about him, Lucy, she said. Stephen is clever and handsome, said Lucy. He loves me and I love him. He likes music. His friend Philip Wakeham likes music too. We will sing together. Oh, Lucy, I must not meet Philip Wakeham, Maggie said. Tom hates him. Philip and I were in love. But my father hated Mr. Wakeham, and Tom hates Philip. That is a sad story, Lucy said. I will make you happy. Philip is in Italy now, but he will come back soon. I will speak to Tom. Tom and Philip must be friends. You will marry Philip, said Lucy, and I will marry Stephen. We shall all be happy. A few moments later, a tall young man came into the room. Stephen! This is my cousin, Miss Tulliver. Stephen bowed. He looked at Maggie. She was very beautiful. Maggie, this is Mr. Stephen Guest. Please be friends. The next day, Maggie went to St. Ogg's. She saw her brother, Tom. He lived alone in St. Ogg's. Hello, Maggie, said Tom. Are you well? Yes, I am well, Tom, Maggie replied. I am not going back to the school. I am going to live with Mother at the dean's house. Tom, Maggie said, I must tell you something. Philip Wakeham is coming back to St. Ogg's. Philip is Lucy's friend. He will come to her house. I shall meet him there. I hate Philip Wakeham, said Tom. Oh, Tom, Maggie said, Lucy is my friend, and she is Philip's friend. I want to speak to Philip. Yes, Maggie, Tom replied. I understand, and I want to be a good brother. Speak to Philip, Maggie, but you must not meet him alone. And I want to be a good sister, said Maggie. Thank you, Tom. Chapter 9. Happy Days. Maggie was happy at the Deana's house. Stephen often came to see Lucy. The three young people sometimes went in a boat on the river Floss. In the evenings, they sang together. Maggie, Lucy, and Stephen laughed. They were happy, but Maggie and Stephen were starting to love each other. One evening in May, Maggie was sitting in the garden. She was reading a book. She heard a sound and she looked towards the river. Stephen was getting out of a boat. He walked towards her. Good evening, Miss Tulliver, said Stephen. He held up some papers. I have brought these songs for Lucy, he said. Lucy is not here, Maggie said. We will not sing tonight. Philip Wakeham has come to St. Ogg's, Stephen said. I saw him this morning. He will come here tomorrow. Maggie's book fell to the ground. Stephen quickly picked it up. He gave the book to Maggie. Stephen's fingers touched Maggie's fingers. They looked at each other. I must go, Stephen said. Please stay, said Maggie. No, Maggie. Will you give Lucy the songs? Yes. And Philip will come here tomorrow. Will you tell Lucy? Yes. Stephen walked away. He got into his boat. Oh, why did Maggie come to St. Aug's? Stephen thought. I love her. I must not meet her alone. The next morning, Philip Wakem came to the dean's house. Maggie was alone. She said, I have spoken to Tom. We shall be friends, Philip. And she smiled at him. A few minutes later, Lucy and Stephen came into the room. Sing your new song, Stephen, Lucy said. Will you play the piano, Philip? Philip played the piano and Stephen sang his song. Maggie was very happy. Her face was beautiful. She looked at Stephen and he looked at her. Philip looked at Maggie too. He understood everything. Chapter 10. I Love You. Stephen Guest and his family lived at Park House near St. Aug's. At the end of May, there was a dance at Park House. There were bright lights in the rooms, there was music, people were dancing. Stephen Guest was dancing with Lucy. She was very happy. Maggie was happy too. She loved music and dancing. At first, Stephen did not speak to Maggie, but he looked at her many times. He wanted to dance with her. He wanted to hold her hand. But he danced with Lucy. Then Stephen saw Maggie again. She was sitting alone. He went towards her. Maggie looked at him and she smiled. It is very warm here, Stephen said. Shall we go into the garden? Maggie stood up. Stephen held her arm. They walked together into the garden. They stood near some red roses. Maggie held one of the flowers. It had a sweet smell. The flowers are very beautiful, said Maggie. Stephen did not answer. Suddenly, Stephen touched Maggie's arm. Then he kissed it, again and again. Maggie pulled her arm away. Her dark eyes were angry. Stephen, she said, this is wrong. You love Lucy. Please go away now. We must never meet alone again. Maggie went quickly into the house. A few minutes later, Stephen followed her. Maggie listened to the music. She talked to people. She smiled. But she did not look at Stephen Guest. A few days later, Maggie was walking by the river. She was alone. She heard a sound behind her and she turned round. Stephen Guest was riding towards her. Stephen got off his horse. Please walk with me, Maggie, Stephen said. I must talk to you. Why are you here? Maggie said. We must not meet alone. You are angry, Stephen said. I understand, but I love you. I love you, Maggie. You must not say that, Maggie said. You must go away, Stephen. I love you. Please love me, Stephen replied. Don't say that, Maggie said. You love Lucy, Stephen. Do you love me, Maggie? Stephen asked. Tell me, Maggie. Maggie did not answer. She started to cry. We love each other, Stephen said. Lucy will understand. I love you, Stephen, Maggie said. But I love Lucy too. She is my friend. I cannot be cruel to Lucy. Please, Stephen, leave me. Please go away. Stephen looked at Maggie. There were tears in her beautiful dark eyes. I will go, Stephen said. Kiss me, and I will go. Maggie kissed him. Please go now, she said. Stephen got onto his horse and he rode away. Chapter 11. The River Floss. One day in early June, Maggie and Lucy were talking. Maggie, I have some good news, Lucy said. My father and Mr. Guest are going to buy Dorlcote Mill. Tom will be the miller. Aunt Tulliver will live at the mill with Tom. And Philip has told his father about you, Maggie, Lucy said. Mr. Wakem wants to meet you. You and Philip will get married. I am happy about the mill, Maggie said. But I will not marry Philip. I am going to leave St. Ogg's at the end of June. Leave St. Ogg's? Said Lucy. Why, Maggie? I must work. I must get a job, Maggie replied. So Tom and Mrs. Tulliver went to live at Dorlcote Mill again. Stephen came to the dean's house every day. Philip was often there too. In the evenings, the four young people often sang together. Stephen sang love songs. He did not sing them for Lucy. He sang them for Maggie. But Lucy did not understand. One evening in late June, Lucy said, "Let's go in the boat tomorrow. We will go down the river. We will go to Luckreth." 4 people in the boat is too many, Stephen said. Philip, you go tomorrow with Lucy and Maggie. I will go with them the next day. Then Maggie and I will meet you tomorrow, Philip, Lucy said. Come at 10:30. But the next morning, Lucy had to go with her father to another town. At 10:30, Stephen Guest came into the house. Maggie was alone. Where is Philip? Maggie asked. He is ill. He cannot come, Stephen replied. Where is Lucy? Lucy is not here, Maggie said. She is with her father. We cannot go without her. Please come, Maggie, Stephen said. You are going away soon. I will not see you again. Let's go on the river for an hour. I will come with you for an hour, Stephen, Maggie replied. After that, we must not be alone again. They walked down to the river and got into the boat. The sun was shining. Stephen rowed the boat, and it moved quickly over the water. Lucy will come back this afternoon, said Maggie. We must come back before 2:00. The sun was hot. Stephen stopped rowing. The water carried the boat along. Stephen and Maggie were very happy. They did not think about the time. But much later, Maggie cried out, We have passed Luckreth. Where are we? It is very late. What will Lucy say? We must go back. Stephen held Maggie's hand. She was crying. Let's not go back. Let's get married, Stephen said. Maggie did not answer. She could not speak. She could not think. We must get married, Maggie, Stephen said. We are together now, forever. Stephen started rowing again. He did not turn the boat round. The river was wide. The water rushed past. There were no villages next to the river. Suddenly, Stephen saw a steamboat. Look, Maggie, he said. The steamboat is going to Mudport. We will get onto the steamboat. We will get married in Mudport. Maggie was very unhappy. Stephen and Maggie got onto the steamboat. Stephen spoke to the captain of the steamboat. This lady, my wife, is very tired, Stephen said. Please take us to Mudport. I will pay you well. Maggie sat down and she went to sleep. Night came. All night, Stephen sat next to Maggie. Chapter 12. I cannot marry you. Maggie woke very early in the morning. She remembered everything. She was on a steamboat. She was with Stephen. She started to cry. Don't cry, Maggie, Stephen said. We will be in Mudport this afternoon. We will get married. but Maggie did not speak. She was too unhappy. They got off the steamboat at Mudport. Stephen took Maggie to an inn. "I will not marry you, Stephen," Maggie said. "You must leave me now." "I cannot live without you, Maggie," Stephen said. "I cannot go now." "Then I will go," said Maggie. "Yesterday, I could not leave you. Today, I can leave you. Goodbye, Stephen." "Maggie," Stephen said, "I was wrong yesterday. I'm sorry." "We were both wrong yesterday," Maggie said. "But we love each other," Stephen said. "That cannot be wrong." "We are being cruel to Lucy," said Maggie. "That is wrong. I love you, but I cannot marry you. I am going back to St. Aug's alone." "No," Stephen shouted. "People will say Maggie is a bad woman. Your life will be terrible." "I will tell Lucy everything," Maggie said. "She will understand. She will forgive me. And she will forgive you, Stephen." Stephen said nothing. Maggie left the inn. She went back to St. Aug's. Chapter 13. 3 Letters. Tom Tulliver and his mother were at Dorlcote Mill. Tom was standing outside the house. He looked down at the river. The water was rushing past. Then Tom turned towards the house. He was angry. Maggie was standing by the door. She was very unhappy. "Tom, I have come back," Maggie said. "You are a bad woman," Tom said. "I don't want you here." Mrs. Tulliver came to the door of the house. She listened. "I was wrong, Tom," Maggie said. "I am sorry." "I don't believe you," Tom replied. "Lucy was your friend. Now she is ill and unhappy. I will give you some money, but you cannot live here." Maggie started to cry. Mrs. Tulliver came out of the house. She went to Maggie and she kissed her. "I'll go with you, my child," Mrs. Tulliver said. Maggie and her mother went to St. Aug's. They lived in a small house next to the river. But Maggie wanted to live alone. After a few days, Mrs. Tulliver went back to the mill. Stephen Guest went away. He wrote a letter to his father. "Fathre, I was wrong. I loved Maggie Tulliver, and I wanted to marry her. Maggie's is good. She is not a bad woman. Please shew this letter to Lucy. Ask her to forgive me. Stephen." At the beginning of July, Maggie got a letter from Philip. "Maggie, you are good. You are strong. I met you 10 years ago. I loved you and you loved me. I love you now, Maggie. I shall always be your friend, your forever Philip Wackham." 3 weeks later, Maggie was sitting in the house next to the river. She was sitting by a window. She was looking at the river Floss. Suddenly, someone spoke her name. She turned round. "Lucy," said Maggie. Lucy went to her cousin and kissed her. "I am happy to see you, Lucy," Maggie said. "I am sorry about Stephen." "I understand," Lucy said. "You loved him and you sent him away. That was good. You were strong." "Forgive him, Lucy," Maggie said. "He will come back." "I have been ill," Lucy said. "I am going away. But I will come back soon, and I will visit you again." Maggie kissed her cousin. "Goodbye, Maggie," Lucy said quietly. In August, the weather was very bad. The rain fell. Hour after hour, it rained. Day after day, it rained. Was there going to be a flood? The water in the river Floss was rising higher and higher. One day, Maggie got a letter from Stephen. "My dearest Maggie, why did you leave me, Maggie? You took away your love. You took away my life, Maggie. I want to be with you. I am your forever, Stephen." Maggie was lonely and unhappy. She sat in the little house next to the river Floss. She read Stephen's letter many times. She cried and cried. Hours passed. Night came. The rain fell all night. The river rose higher and higher. Chapter 14. The Flood. Suddenly, Maggie was very cold. She looked down. The floor was covered with water. The river Floss had flooded. Maggie was in great danger. Her house was next to the river, and there was water in the house. Maggie ran to a window and she opened it. She looked outside. It was dark, but she could see water everywhere. The streets of St. Ogg's were covered with rushing water. There was a little boat outside the house. It was tied to the wall. Maggie climbed through a window and she got into the boat. She untied the boat. The water car ride the boat away from the house. Maggie was alone in the darkness. The boat moved very fast. The flooded river was carrying it along. Maggie was very frightened. The rushing river carried the boat out of the town. Maggie saw the tops of trees and the tops of buildings. "I must go to the mill," she thought. "I must help Tom and Mother." Maggie started to row. The boat left the river. Soon Maggie's boat was moving over the flooded fields. At last, Maggie saw Dorlcote Mill. "Tom, where are you?" Maggie shouted. "Mother, this is Maggie." Tom was in the house. He was upstairs. He looked out of a window. "You have come, Maggie," he said. "Yes, Tom," Maggie replied. "Where is Mother?" "Mother is not here, but she is safe," Tom said. Tom got into the boat. "I will row, Maggie," he said. Tom sat down in front of Maggie. "We must go to Park House," said Maggie. "It's on higher ground." Tom started to row. He looked at Maggie. Brother and sister were together again. The sun was rising. Tom rowed on. Soon they were on the river Floss again. Maggie looked behind Tom. There were great trees in the rushing water. The trees were coming towards them. Maggie screamed, "Tom, look behind you!" she shouted. Tom turned round. He saw the danger, but he could do nothing. He held his sister in his arms. "We are going to die, Maggie," he said. A great tree hit the boat. The boat went under the water. Soon the boat came up again, but it was empty. Days later, some people found Tom and Maggie. They were in each other's arms. They were dead.